sadly, but it did mean that I was able to go home and say to my husband one day, I really want to start this business. And I think what we should do is we should sell the house and free up the capital that I'd made from selling Abbey business centres and move up to our holiday home in Ely. And mentally he said yes. And then I was like, well, that's fine. It doesn't matter if I don't pay myself. And I afford not to pay myself for 2 years. And for the first sort of 6 months of Criton, I went around going, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work because it's fine. And then I realized that I better stop saying that because that wasn't a very good mindset. But basically, parents, and then I guess I was always interested in startups because of that background. And I definitely had a couple of strong mentors in my early career, both who were female, who sort of set the tone for that, for the fact that women could be in senior positions, and they definitely guided me and made me see that I could have a career in business, and that working your way up through the sort of corporate ladder, it was possible for women. And so that sort of stands out as I'm going to be in business, but I'm not going to have my own business, and I want to be senior, was kind of where I came from.
And could you tell us a little bit more about then how you did work up through this corporate ladder? Where did you start?
Yeah, so I did an HND in business, and then I was keen to get into the workforce. I started with a supermarket company called Gateway, which I don't even know who they are now, but they were quite big in Scotland at that point. And I went after my HND to run their personnel and training department in the north of Scotland. So I had 3 stores to look after. So I moved up to Montrose. I passed my test in the morning, and I basically got in my car and drove to Montrose and had a rented flat. My mum was having a fit, by the way. And I started there, and I was interviewing like butchers and bakers on my first day, which was quite hard because I am neither a butcher or a baker to this day. So that kind of gave me a taste for it. And then I got made redundant from that role, came back. I went to work at Heriot-Watt University, Stirling University, then Heriot-Watt University, mostly in administrative roles, but with finance. And then I went back to university at night school and got my degree in business studies with finance. And then what did I do after that? I went to work for the Institute Chartered Foresters, which was a completely random role, but it got me out of driving across. I lived in Leith and driving across town every day to Heriot-Watt. And that was really the first time that I had, I guess, proper responsibility. I was number 2 to the executive director. We ran a sort of whole bunch of sort of professional member organisation stuff. And I guess I'd developed what was my 3-year cycle, generally 2.5-year cycle, which was the first time I would go in, I wouldn't have a clue what I'm doing. You'd go through the first year, you'd be like, oh, second year, you had a better idea. And third year, you were like, I've got it, I'm ready to move on. And that led me to working along the road in St Combs Street for a company called Citybase, which was serviced offices. And it was lovely because it was helping small businesses. And then I sort of became more senior in that business. I was headhunted into Abbey, and I worked my way up, much to some people's surprise, from running a centre to, I guess, sort of sales. I was project director, and then I was sales director, and then I was randomly MD, even though I didn't apply. But the interim managing director came into Abbey to find a new MD. And I said, well, I'm not going to work for either of the guys who are going to get this job. So here's a list of things you need to do to make this business better in the interim. I'll help you do it, and then write me a good reference when you leave. And after 3 months, she said, would you like the job? Because you're the only person I've spoke to who's got a plan. So that was my sort of ascent into becoming a managing director. And I was, I think, 34 when I took over as MD at Abbey.
And then so that really kind of set your rudder for management, senior management, leadership positions. So from there, What then took you to thinking about starting up your own company?
So at Abbey was a kind of turnaround situation, I guess, which was why they thought that they could just employ someone who was 34 to be the boss and see if she could sort it out. So I fixed it and then I grew it, and then I took it to market and learned what we needed to do to increase the value. And then we went back and did that for a couple of years and then sold it. And the first time we went to market, I had an advisor in to help me. And the second time I was like, I don't need to pay 120 grand to help. I'm like, I know what to do this time. So I just took it to market myself. The same format, you know, the information memorandum really was updated, and the plans were fairly similar. Serviced office market is quite a stable market, you know, like you have offices, you rent them to people, you try and get them to stay a bit longer, you try and put the price up, that sort of thing. But we knew that there was really only one likely bidder in the market who could afford us, but we also knew that they needed to be kept true with competition. And so that was the sort of took me through to 2011, having sold to Regis and left. And then I went into a business called Lomond, which was aggregating all the letting agents in Edinburgh. I had a short stint at Lomond, 9 months. I think it's fair to say, having come out of a business where I was the big boss, going into a smaller business where I was notionally the MD, but really didn't have much ability to make a difference, to change things. It didn't really work out. And we parted amicably, I think, on both sides. It wasn't working for me and it wasn't working for them. And then I went to work with Chris Stewart Group, and he is a sort of well-known property entrepreneur. I think he was the only property guy in Scotland who made it through the financial crash. And he wanted to set up a serviced apartment business, but he didn't want to commit to any of the working with Marriott or signing a management agreement. He didn't know whether it was going to work. So we were introduced, and he said, do you think you could operate this for me and see if it works? And I said, well, I used to be quite good at putting bums on seats. How hard can heads on beds be? And that was the first mistake, because I'd always said I wouldn't run a hotel, but of course it really was a hotel. And then I realized actually it is quite hard putting heads on beds. So I had a steep learning curve on hotel room distribution, but it was great and I loved it. And I suppose it was a good place for me to go back to that whole, when you're in a small business, you do spend a lot of time. Having come out, when I sold Abbey, it was turning over 20 odd million. And I was like, who's going to do that? Oh, that'll be me. I probably had a few months of just, oh, that'll also be me. I'll just do everything. And then I'll stop asking myself that. And it was setting that up. That's where I had the idea for Criton, because I was looking for a way to solve how I get information, how I could get information to guests pre-stay, during stay, and post-stay, and on their phone. And it was very expensive for an independent to be able to do that. And so that was the idea. And then once I had the idea, sort of spoke to folk and got put off a bit, and then I kept thinking about it. And then I thought, no, I'm going to do it. And that's when I had that random conversation with my husband, which was like, can we just sell our house and move to Ely and pretty much use most of it to set up a business and buy a gift shop? Because in my head, I was like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a technology business, even though I'm not a technologist, and I'm going to run a small gift shop to give me a bit of extra cash. And then, yeah, guess what? That's not possible. So Neil, who was my husband, was in the police. He actually gave up on the police. He was ready to come out, and he runs a gift shop. So that's much better. And yeah, I went off into the world of technology with a lot of naive optimism, frankly.
That's really interesting, Julie. You've kind of turned on its head what the typical path is of having a side hustle that turns into your business. You actually had the side hustle as the bit on the side and plowed all your money into the technology business, which was a huge risk to take, but completely paid off. So it'd be really great to pick a little more into, you mentioned you got put off initially when you had your idea. So where did you take this idea? you know, what support and help did you get? Did you go through any accelerator programs? Did you surround yourself with good mentors?
Can I
Yeah,
just say, we've got quite a few questions coming in, Julie. So maybe if we pause after this next bit of the story and we can take some questions and then come back.
cool.
Brilliant.
So yes to all of that, Gillian. I mean, Julie Ashworth's on the call. She was probably with me through all of this and listened to me bleating my heart out about whatever I was bleating about. So I say I'm a non-technologist, right? But I was always IT support my family. So I do myself down a bit there. I do like computers. I like to think how they work and I like the adoption of technology. I'm not a developer. But I had mentored several software businesses. So a while back, sort of before this, I was the chair of Prince's Scottish Youth Business Trust, and we supported several tech businesses that I then mentored and you know, became friends with these people. So I had a bit of an idea about tech companies and SaaS. So that was good. I had a great, I had a good understanding of hospitality, parents having had this hotel, and then I had done a couple of, you know, years then at that point with the Lateral City. And I guess really the first thing was I kept saying I was going to do an app, but really what I wanted to do was build a do-it-yourself system for apps. And so I spoke to a couple of developers. One developer was like, oh, Apple aren't going to let you do that. It's quite complicated. So that I kind of parked it for a while. And then I saw somebody else had done something similar, not what I wanted to do, but similar. And I thought, well, if they're able to do it, maybe I could do it. I spent quite a lot of time looking at Apple's rules and regulations. I thought, no, I think I can get around this. So there was a lot of research went in to get to the point where I thought, no, I think I can have a go at this. And then, yes, I was very fortunate early doors at Lateral City to be partnered with Peter Lederer, actually through the IOD as a mentor. And he mentored me through Lateral City. Because I was like, you know, the last time I was involved in hotels was when I was 17. Really, I was, you know, it was my mum and dad. So it'd be good to have someone to call on. And so he was great. And then by that point, I had a couple of other people that I come across who were on the technology side in hospitality. And, you know, people are generally very happy to give you a little bit of time here and there. So I did, yes, I took advantage of all of that. And of course, I was well known in the industry just because that's the sort of person I am. And so in terms of I engage, I believe that you should engage in your industry associations. I believe it's a good way to keep yourself up to date. And, you know, then of course I'm a woman, so that's a benefit to us, right? Because generally there's just a load of blokes and then you're the only woman quite often. So, and I had done quite a lot of chatting to people at the same level as me to say, would you use this? Do you think this is a good idea? So that was kind of how I validated it really sort of off the cuff, usually at the bar, potential user research. What do you think about this app idea? Oh, that sounds great. So yeah, that I did, I guess, quite a lot of that.
So we'll stop here first, take some questions. I should have said at the beginning who both Carrie and I are. I'm just assuming that our members obviously know who we are, but so this co-hosting tonight is Carolyn Curry, Director of Mint Ventures, and myself, Gillian Fleming, Managing Director of Mint Ventures. So I'm going to hand over to Carrie. Thank you.
A lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to do them slightly in reverse order because the first questions are quite reflective ones. So I'll take the more journey-based ones first and then perhaps come back to some of the reflections, Julie. So starting with Lauren, she'd love to hear how you were able to test and scale what became an enterprise software at the beginning with very little resources. You know, that key question, I guess, about bootstrapping. How do you, especially in tech, of course, how do you do it?
Yeah, so Lauren, I found an open source platform which had been built to allow allow developers to publish multiple apps. And then, excuse my French, I bastardized the hell out of the front end and made it hospitality focused. So I kind of I was still the customer at this point, right? Even though I had left Lateral City, I knew what I wanted. And so we knew that that was stable and we were able to scale it. I mean, you know, in the early days, you know, we had set up Stripe plugin. You could come in, you could build it yourself, public, pretty much get to the point where we then had to do what we had to do to publish it. And it was, you know, it was cross-platform, and it just worked. So I was kind of simple, and then I went to market with a 3-month beta test. If you signed up, you were then going to be one of our founders, which gave you a lifetime discount of 50%. And I got 50 sign-ups, I think, mixtures of holiday homes and service departments and a couple of hotels. And actually, I'll never forget it. We learned a couple of really important things. One, most folk didn't want to build their own app. They wanted content control. So that was quite interesting. But the second thing was, I'll never forget it. One of our customers in Birmingham just basically went away and built this absolutely gorgeous app using our system. And, you know, we're in the CSS and making it look like, and we were like, ooh, that's exciting. And so that was kind of where we got to. And just as an aside, if I had, because we went on to rebuild from scratch, because what we learned was people didn't need to build an app themselves. People wanted content control, and that meant that we didn't have to carry all the overhead of all that front end, build your own app. We just did it for them, and that took us a lot less time because we were obviously qualified and they weren't. So in a way, although we had a bit of a glitch in 2018 when I could tell something wasn't right, but I didn't know what it was because I'm not a developer, and that's when we made the decision to rebuild. I would say, again, MVP, anything you can do that, you know, it was pretty ugly, but it worked. So I'm a big fan of that.
It's hard, isn't it, when it's your baby, though, to MVP it, especially when you've gone through that cycle, isn't it, Julie? And I think that's where the human nature bit kicks in, and you have to be quite ruthless.
Yeah, Carrie, years ago, I was told something that I never forget. So it was by a boss of mine, and he said, when you're writing a document, write it and then design it afterwards, because you could spend all your time designing it and never write it. And I am a bit like that, but it did kind of stick with me. So I sort of think when you're in this scrappy phase of what's it going to do, is it going to do what you think it is, you've just got to cope with the fact it's not going to look as good as you want, but as long as it kind of delivers against the pain point, then you should be happy.
I think that advice is worth at least £1 million.
Okay.
Says the banker in the room. Right, okay, I'm going to move on to the next one because it's quite related, I think, and I'm sure loads of people wonder about this, Julie. As a non-tech person, how did you feel dealing with software tech businesses? Did you go down, you've partly answered this, but did you go down the third-party route or did you bring it in-house? And I guess, what was that journey like? You know, you've talked a bit, I guess, about some of those decisions, but what was that like?
I was absolutely fixated on I was going to have my own developers in Scotland. That was the only way I could do it. I needed to be in the same room as them, be able to talk to them, share my vision with them. And then what you don't really understand is that, of course, software development is a very focused kind of endeavor. And so you can't just go around standing in front of them pontificating about your vision because they're in the middle of writing something quite complex or testing something, or, you know. So I do think it's one of those things where I think I only really got to grip with product management as a function and how to communicate with my developers towards the end of Criton. And, you know, I thought managing a sales team was hard, but oh, no, nothing on a development team, I have to say. So I did find that very hard. And I almost got to the point where I didn't go towards them as much because I was kind of scared to interrupt them and I felt like I didn't have anything to add. And no, I would do that very differently this time. I would understand their need for focus, but I would also make sure that I was communicating regularly with them around about where we were going. And also, somebody said to me early doors, oh, they always want to refactor stuff. And I was like, no refactoring. And that's just a nonsense. Like, sometimes you need to refactor. And the other thing was, don't tell them what to do. Well, I completely misinterpreted that. So I spent quite a lot of time going, oh, you know, whatever you think. Actually, what they mean is don't tell me how to do it. I'll figure out how to do it. Tell me what you want it to do. So yes, it wasn't easy. And actually, I think in 2019, we were struggling to get developers, and we outsourced some of our development to a hospitality specific development house in Czech Republic. And it was brilliant. So I do say to a lot of founders now as a mentor, frankly, that's the least of your worries. And if you're working with a outsourced development, they will take you through some of the really good rigors of project management that will actually save you a load of money as you go through it, because your developers won't be trying to build something and going, where does that go? And because they'll want it all before they actually even let their developers close to it.
So there's a lot of learning in there. And I don't think that's unusual, is it? We hear this a lot, whether it's a technology-based business or a business that's adopting tech.
Yeah.
And interestingly, we did some survey work at the start of this year. Sorry, I'm saying we, this is Women's Enterprise Scotland. And we asked for the first time a bit about people's digital experiences, because of course there was a lot of digital funding around pre-pandemic. And we asked a slightly random question, but we asked, and if you managed to get funding, what was the outcome? Was it as successful? Did you get the value that you expected? And now Gaynor, who's our PR manager, will kill me for releasing this before. But I was really surprised. The perception of value was relatively low. But time you went through the funnel of, did you get funding? So a lot of people didn't. Some did. More than usual, I would say, did. But then, did they get value? And quite a lot said, well, yes, but not what I expected, or no, I didn't get it. And I think there's a lot in that, Julie, that I guess we all need to learn better practice, don't we, with that particular industry?
I kid you not, I find it fascinating. I'm a big sort of interested in people and people management and what makes people tech and teams and all that sort of stuff. And it's massive, because generally you are, you know, it's a generalization, but generally you would expect a lot of your developers to be more on the introverted side. You know, I literally had, you know, developers on one side of the room, and then it went into sort of project management and customer success, which tended to be a, you know, sort of middle introvert, a wee bit extra. And then I went to marketing, which was quite extroverted. Then I went to sales, which was very extroverted. And, you know, I mean, literally, if you were doing insights, which is obviously that amazing Scottish company, it was just like red, yellow, green, blue. I mean, it was quite fascinating. And as I walked down the room, because I'm obviously yellow red, as I walked down the room, as I got closer to the blue, I was like, oh, to get my game face on, you know, it was a nonsense, but it was absolutely a thing.
Yeah, I think there's loads that will relate to that. So Lauren, Julie, I hope that answers the questions that we're asking, but if it triggers more questions, please put them in the chat. So I'm going to start now on some of the more reflective questions. So Katerina, you've waited a while because you asked the first questions. So there's a batch of 3 here coming up, Julie, so I'll repeat them because 3 is a lot to remember all in once. But look, 3 questions are, if you had to do this all over again, what would you do differently? So I think you've alluded to some of that.
Yep.
What is the essential skill, in your opinion, that helps you to keep going? And so I'm interested to know that. And what advice would you give to your sort of 20s younger self? So they're great questions. So firstly, if you had to do this all over again, what would you do differently? That was the first.
I think there's a big thing in this. So I'm not a big one for regrets, right? I went into this, it was a big learning experience, and you can't change it, I can't undo it. But definitely the development team and what product management is, I now understand that, so I would handle that differently. I would have brought a chief technology officer in much more quickly than I did. And I talked earlier about, we got to this, we were building out of this open source product, and we just got in a technical fan call. I kept doing this, all the wires weren't connected right, and the team were struggling with PHP, and you know, and we got someone really senior in, Andrew Williams. Well, I got a chair in, and he brought in Andrew Williams to do some consultancy, and Andrew said to me, which I thought, you know, was amazing. Yeah, you just need to rebuild this. He said, I hardly ever say that, but you just need to rebuild this now, Julie, go for it. And so we were keeping our sort of open source infrastructure available as we were rebuilding. So I don't know that I could do that differently, because as I say, if I had built what I thought we needed, I would have built the wrong thing. But you know, the CTO might have made that a bit easier. And I had a fantastic young man who worked with me, came out of an MSc at Edinburgh Uni in AI. He'd worked previously, he was a Mauritian, and he was brilliant, but he'd never managed at that scale before, and you understand how important that is. And then I know Gillian's got some questions for me, which are a bit around about, you know, funding and that. So maybe we'll get into that in a bit. And then for me, the skill I think I have, and it comes and goes, is resilience. I think you've got to know that you can be resilient. Because you've got to be your own cheerleader and your team's cheerleader. You've got to take a deep breath when you've got to make a decision that's hard. You've got to not beat yourself up, but you've got to beat yourself up a little bit because you need to learn. I mean, you know, it is quite exhausting, frankly, and you're in your head a lot, and then you have to get out your head because your team needs you not to be in your head all the time. So I think resilience is key. And then from a 20-year-old self, I might say, don't start a business or run a hotel. No, I think I might have not done the HND. I might have done the degree. I had an offer of a degree in Aberdeen, but my boyfriend was going to Edinburgh, so I went to Edinburgh and did an HND. I might have done the degree, but you know, actually, because I did my degree at night school, it was with all mature people, and it always has felt to me like that was really inspirational for me, because I was surrounded by a lot of, you know, I was 24, 25. I was surrounded by a lot of 40, 50, 60-year-olds who had real life lived senior experience. So maybe not. I don't know, just keep going. Don't eat so much. You know, you don't need that many crisps.
I think Julie, just as you alluded to there, it might make more sense to carry on talking about your journey and come back to these reflective questions at the end. So where we got to was, we've had quite a lot of discussion around the product development, the technology development. It'd be really great to hear more about your funding journey and, you know, really right from the beginning until exit.
Yeah, so as I say, I convinced my husband. So I made a bit of money selling Abbey. So by the time I was selling Abbey, I was a shareholder and MD. So I made a bit of money that had basically gone into the house in Edinburgh. And Neil and I, at that point, I still thought we would have children. So I had a big 5-bedroom house, and it was very lovely and all that. But then we couldn't have children. And so I was like, don't really need a 5-bedroom house for the two of us and 2 dogs. So let's sell it and start a business instead. So the money initially came out of that. I said to myself, I would spend 50 grand on Criton. Spent 150 grand on Criton. And I didn't pay myself, of course. So sweat equity on top of that. And then I leveraged that almost to double with Scottish Enterprise funding. I got decent sums of different test grants, and I got an innovation award. I think it was about 49,000 or maybe 53,000, which was really, really helpful. So it allowed me to test lots of different things. And then I was like, right. So I'd started in June 16. As I was heading towards the end of 17, I was like, right, I'm going to have to raise some money. I was speaking, you know, I did the usual thing. I did EIE. I spoke to some investors. I actually got an offer of investment from a couple of angels in Edinburgh, and that was all fine. And at that point, I was looking for between 100 and 350. Having never raised money before, I had a plan for both. And my MRR was £1,000. So then the guy who I'd worked with at Abbey Business Centres is a sort of really self-made billionaire Scottish bloke who doesn't live in Scotland anymore. And I wrote to him and said, I know you won't invest in this because it'll be too wee for you, but do you know anyone who would invest in hospitality? And he said the fateful words of, you'll never do anything with 350,000. What would you do with 5 million? And then turned out I could write a plan for 5 million really quickly. So I did, and then he gave me 5 million. Now, you're all going to be sitting there going, what the heck? That is actually, Julie will attest to that. Julie Ashworth will attest to that. That's actually what happened. and he put £5 million into a business that was turning over diddly squat. And he'd never invested in a startup before. I'd never taken investment before. He took half the business. You know, we literally did everything wrong. I mean, I understand that now. At the time, I was like, why would I not take 5 million for half the business? That's amazing. And I could do all this. And then, of course, I scaled before I had product market fit, which is, you know, yeah, not ideal, but I did. And then it is what it is. You know, we learned, and then we kind of turned it around, and then COVID hit. And then I didn't just hit product market fit. I went barreling into product market fit and beyond it, and could barely keep up. And I remember reading a book about how it feels to hit product market fit, and somebody talking about, you know, like you turn around to the shelf to get the product out, there's none left, and you just stocked it up an hour ago, and that's what we were like. And yeah, COVID was really scary and then really great for us. So that was, and by that time, we did lots of stuff through COVID that we were able to take advantage of the fact that we were mid-funding round. So we said to our customers, we will not charge you for 3 months. We didn't lose anyone because of that. And then we did an offer to new customers saying, we'll give you this for 6 months free, the kind of basic product, but you need to do this, and this. 80%. We signed up like hundreds and hundreds of hotels, and 80% of them started paying in the January. So by that time, we were close to break even, and the money, we still had a decent amount of money in the bank, so we had a decent runway, and we were there. But then it was sluggish. You know, by that point, it was kind of, what was going to happen to hospitality? Was there going to be another lockdown? Yes, there was. Could we have another holiday? What about this? What about that? And my team were getting a bit nervous, and I couldn't hire, and I wasn't replacing because I didn't know what was going to happen. I was trying to extend the runway, and it was a pretty tough time. But that really was the sort of the catalyst of what next, because at that point, my investor, bless him, was like, well, I don't think this is going to work, and no, I'm not going to give you any more money. But he owned 50% of the business. Now, you guys are all experienced. You can't raise money if the person who's put 5 million in, which we should never have had in the first place, isn't going to put in even any more money on, but didn't want to sell his shares. You know, so I tried to do a secondary purchase. We couldn't really get the value up, which, you know, you sort of understand, because at that point we weren't profitable. We were definitely in product market fit, but the business was, you know, I mean, I basically did a 10 million funding round on £1,000 MRR, which, you know, even as I say that now, I think, how did that make sense to me at the time? But guess what? When 5 million lands in your bank, you can make it make sense. So, yeah, it was interesting. And of course, really what that was someone investing in me and not really paying any attention on any of the things that I'm sure Gillian and Carrie will tell all of the investors in the room to pay attention to.
Well, just on that point, Julie, actually, you've kind of progressed on. I was going to come back to the point around decision making versus control, and this is the issue when anyone's taking on external investment. So you mentioned that he owned 50% of the company, so therefore all major decisions had to require his agreement, I'm guessing.
Yeah, but I think he might have done 49.5. But the thing is, he was used to working with me, and I was used to working with him, and he was just like, just crack on. You know, I'd written a plan. He was like, just crack on and do it. And there wasn't really anything that wasn't in the plan. So we didn't have a board. We met every quarter, quite often in the Ritz for breakfast, you know, and that was kind of it. So there was never any tricky bits until we got towards COVID, at which point he was like, I don't think this is going to work. And I was like, this is going to work. Like, this is going to work now. If COVID hadn't hit us, maybe it would have taken longer. We were ahead of the game, but it's going to work now. And that was when it got tricky. And then because such a large shareholding, oh no, I'll tell you what happened. We brought in a chair, and he got some options. Yes, so my shareholder, I can't believe I don't even know this, but it must have been 51.49. So yeah. for me.
And so in the agreements that you had in place, in the legal agreements, did that carve out decision making and consents required?
It pretty much, I could do whatever was in the plan. The plan was approved, and there wasn't anything that I needed to do that wasn't in the plan because it was quite detailed. It's quite interesting. And also, he didn't really care. Like, I had written a plan that said, I'm going to spend all this money to raise more. I wanted to grow a global business. You don't grow a global business in 5 million. So he was a bit like, yeah, all right, that's fine. As long as you're hitting your numbers, we'll be able to raise more money. And I might put more in if you are hitting your numbers, and if not, you're on your own, kind of thing, you know. I mean, we went through a period where he's quite elderly now, and I think at one point he thought he was a bit poorly, and he tried to give me the whole thing, and I said no, because I was going to have to pay £1 million in tax. I mean, it was quite ludicrous. I know, I can see Mary Jane shaking her head. It's true. You know, some of these things nobody goes through. I was like, I came home and I said to Neil, he just wants to give me the whole thing. And Neil was like, oh my God, that's amazing. I was like, yeah, but I'm going to have to pay £1 million in tax. That's going to reduce my runway. See, when I look back now, I'm like, oh, what? But yeah, I think that was like 6 months after you invested.
Wow.
Yeah.
So these are the factors that then drove you down a path towards a relatively early exit. Could you maybe talk us a little bit through the exit, and also, you know, what kind of emotions were running through? This is your baby, as Carrie said earlier, this is your baby. Tell us a little bit about the emotional side of it as well.
Yeah, so I worked really closely with a couple of so one secondary investor and another guy in Edinburgh who really wanted to invest but needed my investor not to be in there. So we worked really hard to do that. That didn't happen. But they said, if you manage that somehow, if it changes, come back to us. And then there was a guy in Northern Ireland who was so close, and then he pulled out right at the last minute. I can't remember what happened. Maybe it was a polite no, but it was like, it's not you, it's something else. You know, the money hadn't come in or something. So I was like, right, I'm gonna, you know, so the three options: close down. That wasn't an option. 2, it's at break even. We don't need to raise any more money, but we can't continue to develop what we needed to develop. And remember, we were still in a big product development phase. And I was like, it just made me feel sick thinking about speaking to the customers and saying to them, oh yeah, no, it's coming, you know, but being that sort of zombie vendor that we've all dealt with, I've dealt with and is horrible, or sell it, strategic investment, sell it. And so it was quite easy in a way to make the decision, because I suppose I've always done what's right for the business. That's always how I've decided what has to happen. And so I just totally went into, this is what's right for the business and our customers. And yeah, so I was a bit sad. Was I sad? I think by that time I was quite exhausted with all the faffing around, frankly, and no, this is going to be fine, and you'll never sell this. No, yes, I will, you know. It's like bloody panto. So I just was quickly, right, like, here's the plan. And it was like the playbook came out of the book from Abby. Here's what we're going to do. I talked earlier about industry associations, so I knew all the potential acquirers. I actually knew the owners of them. I had met them all at industry events. I had said who was likely to buy me in a conversation in 2017 because I could see the fit. But I also knew that I needed to keep them competitive. So I went out, I did 20 reach outs. I sent out 10 NDAs, IMs. It was a really simple IM. And I got 3.5 offers. The 4th offer came in after we went into exclusivity, but it was less than I was offered. So, and the business that bought us, Nonius, were the company I thought would buy us. And it was a real strategic acquisition for them. They were trying to get into UK, but I'm not saying I had it totally stitched up, but everybody was like, oh, apps, Julie, that's that mad woman in Scotland. It's everywhere telling us we need apps, and gave us it for free, you know. So they were struggling because they were from Portugal. So they just basically came in and wanted our customer base. And as it turned out, they'd been developing a similar product to mine as part of their wider hospitality technology offering, and really randomly, I had built a more technical product than them, even though they were technical finders, because I was a hotelier. I knew what I had to do, like in the system. So they shortcutted a lot of that. We had also spent quite a lot of time building some automated back end that they found really interesting, and I knew that would also be the case. It caused us a lot of pain. So those were the two sort of value props for the sale, and yeah, it was done pretty quickly. And then it was, and then my investor was sort of like, oh, you know, he was a bit confused that it was worth. I mean, it wasn't. He didn't get his 5 million back. He got a contribution towards it, but he was confused because he was like, I didn't think it was worth anything. And I was like, yeah, it is. You know.
And so, Julie, how did you find the strategic fit in terms of the culture fit? So the business that you had built, how did that culture fit transition over, and how did you carve out the role? How did you negotiate the role for yourself?
Well, I didn't want to stay because I don't know whether I've said it enough times, but I'm not really very good when I'm not in a significant position. And I knew I wouldn't be because their senior team was in Portugal. So they said, how long will you stay for? You know, I said, I don't want to stay with the business, but I'll stay for a while. I only want to stay for 6 months. I stayed for a year, mostly just sort of ramping my time down towards the end, mostly just to make sure the customers were happy. So that was easy. The culture fit was non-existent. Like literally Portuguese, they're all back in the office, can't be trusted. I was totally remote, trusted my team. You know, I'm all like, you teach them, you tell them what they need to do, and then you manage them if they don't do it. And they could be sat in front of you not doing it. You know, presenteeism is not a management force. So yeah, there was no culture fit, and there's hardly any of them left now. But we were sort of starting to wind down the team anyway, because once the decision to sell was made, again, as people were leaving, we weren't replacing. So I think when they acquired us, we were down to 10 maybe. And then a couple of developers immediately saw the writing on the wall. They didn't have to make anyone redundant. They were just like, right, I'm off. And then slowly but surely, CTO wasn't required. He stayed and then he went. So we were left with, I think there was 5 of us as I was leaving. I think Gillian's frozen.
Oh, that's no good. Okay, well, luckily we have got no shortage of questions coming in.
Yeah.
You back, Gillian? Do you want to continue? I'm conscious of time.
No, Carrie, I was actually going to say hand over to you for the questions now, and then my internet went wobbly.
Oh, there's a fine art in this, isn't it? Okay, so back to the questions. So let me just check. I haven't missed anybody at the end. Well, key question, I think, sticking with the tech then before we get into the reflections. Alexandra's question. Do you think it's worth hiring an investment advisor, Julie? So I suppose thinking about your various journeys, I mean, I have to say, I think it's amazing having 5 million land in your lap. You know, it brings different problems, but hey, you know, you've got the 5 million. But anyway, reflecting, what are your thoughts on investment advisors?
I mean, I think any investment advisor would have struggled to say no to that deal, frankly. So I don't know if it would have helped, but I think if you're not in that situation, there's some things that you can certainly do as a finder. And in fact, I've made some notes later on about some things that I think investors could look for in finders that might give them some comfort. But I think if you're not in that game, then ensuring that you're surrounded by someone who is, like, so for example, my lawyer was absolutely outstanding, Adrian Bell at Morton Fraser, and literally that simple agreement that we had, me and my investor, really saved my soul a couple of times, really. So, you know, it does pay to have advisors around you who know this game. You know, if they're not experienced in investment agreements and what can go wrong, then you really need someone who is.
Okay, well, very quickly sticking with the funding before we go into the reflective questions. Gilly's asking, if the £5 million hadn't come in, how would you have secured the investment, and what type, do you have a view on what type of mix that
Yeah,
would be best, especially at business that's pre-revenue or beta testing?
yeah, I definitely. So I had, as I said, I had an offer from two angels in Edinburgh, and I think that I had to go back to them and say, I'm really sorry, I've taken 5 million, and they're still speaking to me, which is nice. So I think I would have got funding, but obviously it would have been for much less equity, and I would have probably been out fundraising a couple of times. I mean, just timing is all in these things, right? So by the time I would have raised that first amount, it would have been 2018. So, would have been interesting to see what happened with the rebuild. But we launched our rebuild just as COVID hit, just like the October before COVID. And so that could have been difficult. I remember speaking to an investor. I had been in 2019, I'd started doing a few sort of going to things. I had been to San Francisco with Barclays, that Commonwealth Venture program that they do, and speaking to investors out there. And I was speaking to him as COVID hit, and he said, you need 18 months runway in the bank. And I was like, well, I was lucky because I had at least 18 months runway in the bank. Whereas if I hadn't taken the 5 million, I probably wouldn't have had. So yeah, I think it would have been, I think to answer the question, Jill, it probably would have been angel money. And I probably would have been in a bit of a cycle of having to continue to raise. I would say that I was never profligate. I never, wasted money. I never traveled first class. I was always in economy, and, I just never did any of that. So it wasn't like I burned that cash. In fact, I think my investor was always completely amazed at how much money I always had in the bank. But, it would have been different than it was. There's no doubt about it. I do quite often look back and think we might have ended up the same, because I think with hindsight, looking at it, I thought we were building an app builder for hospitality, but actually what we needed to build was middleware for all of the different guest journey softwares to come into to make it easy for the guests to engage. And that's what Nonius were building at the same time as us. So it sits really nicely in a suite of wider, they do TV and Wi-Fi and casting and phones and mobile and something else. So as a suite of products for hotels, it sits really nicely in there. And I had kind of thought that would be the exit. I just didn't think it would be at the time.
Okay, and question from Louise. Were you ever aware of it being an advantage or a disadvantage being a woman in your career, Julie? So what's your, reflecting back on all of that, what are your thoughts?
Both.
Yeah,
There's no doubt. I have worked in property and in hospitality, and at senior levels there are very few women, and so we both know that sometimes that's an advantage and sometimes it's not. So I think in property, I was young and I went hard at the partying route, and I was last man standing, and all that sort of networking, and that would have been harder to do if I'd managed to have children, no doubt about that. But also you've got, so it's my dogs are hiding back, you've got that advantage of being able to not be a man. We've got a lot going for us as women. It's just you sometimes you don't always see it. So yeah, both is the answer.
Yeah. Okay, Gillian, back to you, I think, really.
Great. So, well, we'll just round up now. I mean, thank you all very much. I think just to summarize, Julie, I mean, I think your versatility, your capability, your determination, all these characteristics together have what's helped make Criton what it is. And I'm so pleased to see that you're now really giving back to support other founders. But with that in mind, what sort of 3 golden nuggets of advice would you give to those that are looking to invest in a startup company that would help the company?
So I thought about this a lot because I think I am now looking at businesses when I'm mentoring them when they come, when I first meet them, and thinking about what I'm looking for. And I think founders who are self-aware, so what can you do, what can't you do, what do you know, what don't you know, is really important, right? Being aware that you're in that unconscious incompetent space quite a lot is quite important, I think. And then, have they got good advisors around about them? Are they speaking to other people, and not paying them? Like early stages, they should have built a network of people who are interested in what they're doing and be able to buy a coffee for them every now and then, and then sales focus. So either are they selling, or do they understand it's not their bag and someone else is going to be able to sell it for them? And I think the last thing, which is probably the first thing, can they explain the pain point? Do they actually fundamentally know that it's painful enough to get people to move from the status quo, which, as we know, is the hardest bit of sales, or that no matter what it looked like, they would use it because it's so painful? That for me is really what I would be looking for.
That's fantastic. Well, on behalf of everyone here this evening, on behalf of Mint Ventures, just like to say a massive, massive thank you. There's loads of great comments coming back in the chat now saying, so inspiring to hear how you dealt with all the twists and turns along the way, and really, really very much appreciated for your advice. So thanks again, Julie. It's been a really great session.
Thanks for having me.